Chapter 2. After 24 hours of travel, at least it felt good to lie flat. His back had been hurting for months, maybe longer, though he couldn't really be certain. His days at the small hospital near Bukavu, Democratic Republic of Congo, had been filled with patients whose bodies were so battered that paying attention to his own discomfort seemed absurdly weak. Most of them were victims of brutal tribal warfare. Women and children who were relatively lucky enough to have made it to the hospital before their wounds prevented them from walking. Sean's pain came and went. Sometimes he thought it was improving, and then a simple action, bending to lift an emaciated patient from her cot, perhaps, would bring it on with a vengeance. The sensation was like an unhitching of something that surely ought to have stayed connected, and then the compensatory clenching of the surrounding muscles to keep the unhitched pieces from separating altogether. He should have been able to evaluate exactly what was going wrong, but all he could do when it came over him was squeeze his eyes shut and mutter, "Jesus suffering Christ," against clenched teeth. It had gotten pretty bad toward the end of his time in Bukavu. It was a wonder he'd stayed so long. He'd supposed he'd been waiting for that time-to-move-on feeling that settled on him reliably every several years or so. But it never came. Usually, he would hear of something. Military attacks on native Indians in Guatemala, for instance. He had gone there right out of nursing school and stayed for a few years, learning the dialect and suturing wounds, staying far enough away from the politics to be ignored. And then he'd heard of a clinic in the Dominican Republic tending to the slaves of the sugar industry, with an infant mortality rate that rivaled that of the Dark Ages. From there, he'd gone to Kenya. In 2001, there had been a devastating earthquake in India, and he had thought to go for a month or two and help out, but stayed for several years. Then the tsunami in the Indian Ocean hit, and there was such widespread need for medical care, it took him a few days to figure out which country to head for and which relief agency to offer himself to. He wrote Aunt Vivi for travel funds to Sri Lanka. She never said no. She never said yes, either. She just wired the money without a word of interest in his plans or news from home. Bukavu hadn't been his first stint in Africa. The first had been in a little clinic outside of Bomete, Kenya. He'd loved it there. The staff had been great, hard-working and friendly, almost like a family. It was 14 years ago now, but Sean could still see it clearly. Lying there in his long-gone father's bed, it was a relief to focus on the unambiguous past rather than on his throbbing back and undefined future. He'd only been in Kenya a month, so his Swahili was just slightly better than that of Dr. Yasmin Chowdhury, a newly arrived OB-GYN he was working with. "She says she feels full of air," Sean struggled to translate. "Does that mean she's breathing well or having trouble?" asked Dr. Chowdhury. "Imevimba," insisted the girl, and blew her cheeks up like small coffee-colored balloons. "Swollen," said Sean. "Bloody hell," muttered Dr. Chowdhury. "Of course she's swollen. She looks about 10 months pregnant." Slowly, Sean reached out and took the girl's hand. In the 6 years since graduating from nursing school, he'd learned that no matter how good his intentions, a tall, freckled white man was an oddity in developing countries, and sudden moves didn't do anything to instill trust. He gently pressed his forefinger onto the back of her hand, creating a depression that took several moments to disappear. It was a sign of preeclampsia, a potentially deadly pregnancy complication that could only be remedied by delivery of the baby. Dr. Chowdhury met his gaze. "Ah," she said, nodding. "Check her blood pressure." It wasn't only his patients Sean had to prove himself to. He stifled a smile, secretly enjoying the challenge of establishing credibility with a new medical